You're listening to theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
Photography and the outdoors could have been made for each other. What can be nicer than to remind yourself of the landscapes and vistas you've seen than with a beautifully composed picture? Digital photography has made it even easier than ever to point and shoot. Sometimes the results are great, but most of the time you're aware that they could be a little bit better, just not sure how. Jon Sparks is the author of Outdoor Photography, a book which has been produced for outdoor enthusiasts who want their photographs to do full justice to the quality of their outdoor experience. Throughout the book, the emphasis is on practical advice and on integrating photography with the rest of your outdoor life. Like most great photographers, his passion for the subject grew from a very young age.
Well, I've got to dredge back into distant memories there, really, because it was a hobby that I had from mid-teens. I wouldn't like to swear exactly when, and just grew in... My interest just grew over a period sort of through college years and so on. Explored all kinds of aspects of it. And I think what it boils down to is capturing something of what I feel about, particularly in my case, places, but also people that you meet along the way. So the things that you do and the places you go to, which is exactly what I've tried to focus on in the book.
Well, there must come a time though when you're well, everybody's got a camera. I mean, these days everybody's got a camera. But what do you think was the defining moment where you suddenly realised that actually you could take a really good picture as opposed to people that grab snapshots, which is probably the majority of photographers, really?
I don't know if there's a defining moment, or it was more of a slow realisation, and I was inflicting slideshows on family and friends and so on, and I was actually getting a good reaction from people. So it wasn't just that I liked the stuff I was taking myself, but other people liked it as well, and did seem to respond very positively to it. So I think it was not a eureka moment. It was a realisation over a period of a year or two.
And I mean, this is probably the only book I think in the UK that's dedicated to outdoor photography now.
It's probably, certainly in the specific sense of aimed at the outdoor enthusiast. I mean, obviously there are a lot of other books that would deal with landscape photography or nature photography or that kind of thing, but more from the point of view of photographic enthusiasts. And this is aimed very much at the outdoor person, the walker, the climber, cyclist, whatever, who is also interested in photography or simply just wants to get a better record of the things they've been doing and the places they've been. Which
is absolutely perfect. I mean, it says that on the cover, as it were, and I think that's probably one of the most important things to mention about the book in general, because most outdoor people want to have a record of their trip or adventure or experience, and obviously the better quality that picture can be, the more they can relive their experience for themselves or their friends.
But at the same time, recognising the practical limitations of, you're not there first and foremost to take pictures. Your principal reason for being is to go climbing or is to do a trek or whatever. The pictures are important, but they've got to play second fiddle rather than going there specifically as a professional would to take photographs.
It's always a compromise, isn't it? Especially if you've got a partner that doesn't appreciate the amount of time you take.
Yeah, that's... And obviously as a professional who tries to set up some pictures which takes a bit longer, it's very useful to me that I do have a long-suffering partner.
Yes, I think the first...
may grumble occasionally, but usually... in the end is very supportive.
It's the first accessory I think everybody should have, isn't it, really? A long-suffering partner that's very patient. So let's actually talk practicalities then. The book covers all aspects of photography which most people, to take better photographs, would need to be aware of. Obviously the actual tools of the game, as it were, but more of the actual principles, the framings and depth of field and so on. What do you think is the biggest mistake that people possibly make from recording their trips that to actually not capture the actual spark of the moment?
Well, I think probably the things that people do, I'd probably identify two, and one is just getting so caught up in what's going on that you don't ever take that moment to think. And I mean, we're talking about a fraction of a second almost, but certainly a very short time, where you just stop to think about the picture and how the picture is going to capture that moment. Because right at the beginning of the book, I talk quite a lot about the problem with the point and shoot approach, and you've got to add an extra element to it, which is think, point and shoot, because you've got to work out what to point at and what you're shooting for. And so the biggest mistake that most people, or the biggest disappointment that most people find when they get the photographs back, is they don't actually concentrate on the most important elements. There's a lot of noise or distraction in the pictures. And usually it's quite easy to eliminate that, but you've got to be aware of it first. It's like, I think there's an example that I used of seeing a friend's face in a crowd. And when you see the crowd, it's very easy to pick out your friend's face because you recognise them. But the camera doesn't discriminate like that. It sees the whole crowd. And the photograph looks like a photograph of a crowd. And that's analogous to the thing that happens with a lot of other photos, that the eye sees the bit that you're interested in, the camera is less discerning, so you've got to allow for that, and that applies whatever sort of camera you use, really.
There's many aspects of photography in the outdoors that obviously immediately come to mind, everything from landscapes to wildlife, of course. I should imagine most people would probably be considering landscapes as being their first area to take pictures from. Who exactly is the book aimed at? Is it aimed at everybody generally, or is there a specific area that's there to encourage people to consider their photography?
We've aimed it at the general outdoor enthusiast, so there are specific recommendations in there for walkers or climbers or cyclists and so on. Within that, then the largest group would be walkers and trekkers, that kind of area. So probably it's aimed at those kind of people more than anyone else, though I hope people whose interests are a bit different will still find quite a lot in there.
Sure. So let's talk about landscape photography in particular then. Where should people start? What should they, if I've just gone to my local shop, I bought myself a nice new sparkling new digital camera, and it's got all the various trick bits on there, as well as sort of a manual as an automatic setting. Where should I start if I want to actually go and start taking some decent landscape photography around my area?
Well, I think you've just at the end there, you've mentioned around my area, and I think one of the best things that people can do is find a favourite location that you can go back to, on maybe where you walk the dog regularly, or somewhere you go walking locally several times a year, or preferably somewhere you can get to really easily, because a lot of landscape photography is about seeing how the seasons and the weather and the light and so on affect the image you get, and above all seeing how light changes and understanding that. So I think being able to go back and work in the same location under different conditions is one of the, I think, very enjoyable as well. I mean, it's not saying this is drudgery and this is a technical exercise. Have fun doing it, go somewhere that you love, but because you're already familiar with the place and you're probably familiar with attractive aspects and where the light falls at different times of day and so on, then you are well placed to start really sort of learning how things like the change of light affect the images you get. So that's, as a non-technical recommendation, I think that's a very good place to start.
So familiarity with a particular area, so you can see how things change with the effect of light, and obviously the effect of seasons as well, I presume. Yeah. The equipment, shall we say, is I'm able to switch it on and use that straight away. Do you suggest a tripod being an important part of my accessories? Is that vital to me? And what about time of day?
Well, now start with the tripod. I know all the sort of proper photography books, if I can use that word in inverted commas. All those books seem to recommend using a tripod all the time. But of course, for the person whose primary motivation is walking or trekking or something, that's probably going to be very difficult when you actually get into doing longer walks, treks. And I don't think it's essential. I think it's a useful thing to do. If you can, because as much as anything, it slows you down, and that makes you think a bit more about what you're doing. So it's almost a case of it's not going to make the pictures technically any better, but it's going to make your mind better, work better, make you focus a bit more on what you're doing. So tripod's useful, but really isn't essential, and there are lots of other ways to ensure that the camera's not wobbly when you take the picture.
Such as?
Well, simply... Again, we go into some detail in this in the book. I think we've got illustrations of it. Sensible ways to hold the camera. And perhaps here we could talk specifically about the position a lot of people adopt with digital cameras, which I call the praying mantis position, where they're holding the camera some distance away and looking at the screen on the back. And that's fine, but it does make you much more susceptible to camera shake. And from that point of view, there's a lot to be said for a more traditional picture practice that people always adopt with film, of using the viewfinder, and it means that you brace the camera against your eye, and that is immediately more stable. And you can go into finer detail, and I think that holding the elbows not rigidly but firmly against the side of your body all makes you just more stable, much less prone to wobbling around with the camera. In a lot of circumstances, you could also get extra support by leaning against a wall or a rock or a tree or something. If I take a lot of pictures out in the Lake District fells, and there are going to be times when it's very difficult to set up a tripod, or I'm doing a long walk and I'm not carrying a tripod, and I'm looking for a dry stone wall where I can sort of rest the elbows on the wall and brace the camera there. And it becomes second nature quite quickly to think about keeping that camera steady, and which ensures that you get a picture that's really sharp and not just blurred by a little bit of shake.
Well, it would be a shame, wouldn't it, to travel all that way, whatever distance that might be, to be disappointed when you get back and see the pictures.
Well, I mean, I think particularly the thing, obviously, we're talking about. We started talking about going to your favourite locations, and the great thing there is, obviously, if you're disappointed, you can go back, and you can also look at why are you disappointed and revisit it. But if you're on particularly a big trek that might be a trip of a lifetime, or something you only do once every 5 years, and you're never going to go back to that particular area again, then you really want to make sure that you're getting the best out of your pictures.
So the starting point would be to really know how to hold the camera, which you cover in the book quite handsomely. Yeah,
we've tried to cover that in fair amount of detail, because I think it's one of the things that I've seen a lot of people who are photographic enthusiasts, and they tend to use a tripod religiously a lot of the time. But if that's not possible, they're rather clueless as to how to hold a camera when they're not using a tripod, and that's a shame.
And I gather time of day is fairly important as well, isn't it? Because the way the light changes, and also the seasons change.
Yeah, time of day is very important. But again, if you read a lot of the books on landscape photography, they will stress very much shooting at dawn and dusk. But that's it's not always possible, because again, if you're on a trek, you're not going to be able to say, I'm going to go to this particular spot at the optimum time of day. You need to get from one campsite to another, and you pass all sorts of scenes during the day, and you can't do all of them at dawn or dusk. It's just not physically possible. But also in mountain areas, for instance, you may find that at dawn you're in a deep valley and it's all in shadow, and you might see some peaks high up that are illuminated, but the valley just looks black. For a lot of views, actually, the best time of day is going to be much nearer the middle of the day, because that's when the light actually gets into that particular valley or onto the maybe the particular face of a peak that you're interested in. So don't assume that dawn and dusk are the only times to shoot. That works much more in flat country than in mountain terrain.
Right. Okay. So, what else should I have in my bag then? I presume. I mean, coming back to the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book is for outdoor enthusiasts. So you're not going to be able to carry a huge bag full of camera accessories and attachments and so on. What should people consider as being some of the most useful or vital pieces of accessory that they can actually... I mean, if they could carry a small tripod, obviously that would be useful, but it can't be not necessarily practical.
And there are a number of alternatives, and one of the most useful things is a beanbag.
Yeah.
Or I mean, I've suggested you can also simply take something like a mesh stuff sack, put spare hats and gloves and things in it, and that's a very useful thing for supporting the camera on a rock. Particularly if the rock, you want to take a picture, maybe even, as I do quite a lot when I'm walking alone, take a picture and include myself in it, which obviously means I've got to put the camera somewhere and then walk into shot and use the delay to take the picture. And if you're not carrying a tripod, that's difficult unless you can set the camera up and level it on a rock or something. Not every rock has a conveniently flat top. So something like a beanbag or an improvised alternative with a stuff sack is incredibly useful. And of course, if you're carrying hats and gloves and spare bits like that, you're not really adding any extra weight at all. So it's the most convenient alternative. The thing that, particularly for longer trips, that will cause absolute tragedy if you forget it, are things like spare batteries. And obviously, if you're shooting film, you've got to have lots of film, and if you're shooting digital, make sure you've got enough memory cards. And they're the most important things. The things that are hardest to replace are the exposed film or the memory cards that have already got images on. So they're the things that you guard with your life, more or less.
And what about things like filters? Are you an advocate of filters?
Not a great advocate of filters, and arguably the need for filters is less with digital than it was with film anyway, because particularly the most important filters, I think, for me were colour correcting filters to cool down or warm up the light when it's a strange colour. And most of all, the warm-up filter, maybe on overcast days or in shadow or something when the light can be very blue, you would look for a warm-up filter. But obviously with digital, you can adjust the white balance anyway. You don't have that need for the warm-up filter. The filter that's still very useful on some occasions is a polarising filter.
That seems to be universally accepted as
because it will cut through haze and increase, in certain circumstances, increase the contrast. So and give you sort of more vibrant colours. So a lot of people seem to use it all the time, and that's not a great idea. And I certainly see cases where it's too obvious that it's a polarising filter, but it's the most useful single filter, I think, to have in your bag if you're going to carry any filters at all.
And I presume, I mean, everybody treats their camera equipment differently. But accidents can happen, even just a case of getting excess dust from the rucksack, if nothing else, into your equipment. So I presume some kind of maintenance kit is useful.
Yeah. I think there's a story in there in the book when I'm talking about trekking and how I lost the use of one lens on a trek in the Karakoram because it ingested a piece of grit while we were travelling on the back of a jeep, and from then on I couldn't focus the lens at all. So that just became a rather annoying piece of dead weight when we were already carrying too much. So two things really: if you can carry spare lenses, or someone in a group of you particularly, make sure that you've got more than one camera, so that at least somebody's always going to be able to get pictures. But also cleaning Cleaning gear is very important.
Well, dust particularly, dust cloth
Dust.
and a jet blower.
Yeah, particularly for, obviously, if people are using compact cameras, they're fairly well sealed, but you're only really worried about dust on the front of the lens. But if people are using SLR cameras with interchangeable lenses, dust getting into the camera itself when you change lenses is a great problem. You've got to recognise now more and more cameras have dust cleaning mechanism, though, that vibrates the sensor to shake the dust off. But that dust is still going to be lurking around somewhere, and it can easily end up finding its way back onto the sensor.
Yeah, so a bit of static.
And it's a nightmare cleaning those spots off your pictures afterwards, of course.
That saves it,
so it is something to be watching about. And there's obviously the aspect of cleaning it, but being as careful as you can not to get dust anywhere near it in the first place. So, for instance, whenever you're changing lenses, stand with your back to the wind. Simple as that. Particularly in dusty environments, but it's a good general rule anyway.
Okay, well, let's actually just move on again and sort of more practicalities, really. The book, it covers as I said, a lot of the photographic principles as we've discussed, which is extremely useful, and techniques for shooting action photography and so on. But the one thing I'm curious to know, particularly when you're doing travel photography, in your case as well, sort of commercially travel photography, what about the actual way you interact with people you want portraits of in foreign countries? Tell me some ideas and thoughts on that.
Well, I think there's both a practical and an ethical angle to that. And I think from a practical point of view, normally you will get the most appealing pictures if you actually do interact with people, rather than try to sneak pictures with a long lens or whatever. There's also a practical aspect that if you start sneaking around, in certain contexts, if you start sneaking around taking pictures with a long lens and somebody finds you out, it can be quite uncomfortable. In some cultures, you should be very wary, particularly as a male photographer, taking pictures of women and so on. So be aware of cultural sensitivities. Most people in most parts of the world are reasonably happy to have their picture taken, and the best way to deal with it is to be open and upfront about it. And, of course, with a digital camera, you can actually show them what you've taken. Some professional photographers still would carry a Polaroid, so they can actually give people a print straight away. Most people find that's impractical if they're people that you can make contact with. And more people all around the world actually do have email or whatever, so you can actually send people a copy of the picture afterwards, and it's always nice to show your appreciation.
Have you ever seen an instance of somebody becoming a bit unstuck on a situation like that in your travels?
I've heard about stories of people getting beaten up and so on. I've not witnessed it.
Oh,
personally.
Really? As rough as that?
Yeah. I mean, people taking exception. I mean, it happens. It's not just in travels in far off places, but I've known it to happen in this country. People can be very suspicious about anyone taking photographs when there are kids around, in particular. There's a climate that's arisen of a kind of paranoia about that. It's almost assumed anyone taking pictures anywhere near children is a paedophile. And there's certainly been one or two cases of quite ugly incidents happening.
And it's back to...
I mean, I've experienced verbal abuse from that point of view. I mean, some of it was just sort of ignorant yelling. But on other occasions, I've had to sort of actually explain to somebody that I wasn't taking pictures of the children, and I could show. Obviously, again, it's an advantage with a digital camera. You can actually show people, if necessary, what you're doing, and you can say, "Look, this is a general photo of this scene. I'm not focusing on your child or anything like that."
And as you were saying,
but again, it helps. Obviously, it underlines the point that it helps to be open with people and to be upfront and engage with people as far as possible and get their cooperation.
And as you were saying at the beginning about taking a picture of a crowd, it might have your friend in the middle of the crowd, but if the rest of the crowd has got other characters in it that might be socially unacceptable to take pictures of, then you've got to take that into account. The other thing that as time's moving on, and there's so many things covered in the book, which I think is great. But one on sort of personal note, I'd like to ask you. You've obviously been a professional photographer, particularly emphasising on the outdoor activities for some years now. What's it like as a lifestyle? Is it a lifestyle that people could actually make a living of? If somebody thinks that's my ambition, I'd like to do that. What would you describe? How do you describe your lifestyle on that from that point of view?
Well, it is a good thing to be doing because it does mean you can do the thing you love. But I would think that the important aspect is that people have got to love it, because most people do not make a pot of money doing this. And the idea that you get paid to sort of travel all over the world, all expenses paid, it is really reserved for very few photographers. Most of us are doing bits and pieces of other work and mixing photography with writing, and probably working a lot more than 40 hours a week. So it can be a struggle, and it's not getting easier because there are a lot of people out there to do it, wanting to do it, and I think the technology is making it easier for more people to at least attempt to do this. So if somebody really has the passion for the outdoors and for photography, then I would certainly say it's worth thinking about. But you've got to have the passion for both sides of it, and you've got to be prepared to say, well, I will go and walk all day and it will rain all day, and I will live in hope that there's going to be that one break in the cloud that gives me the most amazing picture. So go for it if you really believe you can do it.
So there's actually, although the romantic issue, the romantic idea of it being glamorous, actually in reality there's a lot of wet...
There's a lot of wet walking, and there's a lot of time sitting at your computer afterwards working on the pictures and editing and selecting and all that. And you've got to think about all the other aspects of chasing bills and invoices and
running a business,
doing your VAT return and all sorts of things. So you do not spend all of your time. You're lucky if you spend even approaching 50% of your time actually out there taking pictures in wonderful places.
And I presume once you take the pictures, it's also quite an issue to actually physically sell them as well, contact libraries or whoever.
Yeah, I mean, either placing them with libraries, or if you've done something on commission, that's nice because you've got a guaranteed market for it, but that doesn't happen all the time. So a lot of it is actually selling and promoting your work. And there are lots of changing markets out there now, but not all of them are very lucrative. So you do spend a lot of time doing other things than the thing you actually have the passion for. But you've got to do all the other things to sustain the passion.
That's right. Yes, it's a very, very fine balance. Well, it's a superb book, and it's certainly one which I think everybody that's into outdoor enthusiasts who are into outdoor pursuits that want to capture their activities better should have a good browse through. One final question I'd like to ask you is, looking back over the years of the photography that you have done, what's the photograph that pleases you the most? What is the best photograph you feel you've taken?
It's a very hard question, because just for me, as for anyone, a lot of the photographs that are really special are not just because of some perfect composition or anything like that, but because of association with a great moment and a great personal experience, and that won't necessarily come across to anyone else. One of the photos that I'm particularly fond of at the moment, and it does change from time to time, and some are fresh in your mind and so on, but there's one that I've just ordered a large print of for home, which says something, I suppose, because there's the selection of what goes on the wall, which is a landscape in Wadi Rum in Jordan, which is a wonderful place, of course, and kind of layers of tangled red rocks and mountains receding into sandy desert haze. So I think it's a very atmospheric picture that a lot of people would like, but what makes it special to me is also that collision of it being a satisfying image with the personal memories, and it seems to me to catch something of things that fuel my passion for wild places and for photography, and I think that is what it's all about, is the passion for the wild places and actually images that capture that in some way.
Within outdoor photography, there are chapters on landscape, action, wildlife and close-up photography. Throughout the book, the text and illustrations are related specifically to climbing, cycling, caving and many other outdoor activities. Particular advice is given for compact camera users. It is also illustrated with over 100 colour photographs, chosen both to illustrate the learning points and to provide inspiration. Of course, outdoor photography is available direct from the Cicerone website and all good outdoor book retailers.
This sponsored programme is produced and hosted by theoutdoorstation.co.uk.